So I just thought, hey, I started this Instagram like just a few months ago that I was going to share recipes and talk about places that I go, and trips, all that. And it wasn't really in the ambition of becoming an influencer. I honestly had major imposter syndrome with that. I was like, there's no way people are going to care about what I have to say. Like, I'm not aesthetic.
I really think you weave in social consciousness and the people you represent and give voice to, women, BIPOC folks, LGBTQ community. Was that always part of the idea from day one, or did what happened during the pandemic and Black Lives Matter, did that kind of inform the way you started this platform?
It's part of my identity. It's just part of my identity. It's something I love about women, right? We are so multifaceted, so multi-layered. I'm not saying men aren't, right? But have you ever seen a woman multitask? It is a thing of art.
Nori de Vega is one of the top food and now wine content creators in Portland through her handle Nom Nom Nori. And she's been featured in Portland Monthly, Eater, and more. She also co-founded Filipino supper club Tikim. Hi, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
It's a treat that I get to interview not just amazing people in the wine and food space, but people that I'm friends with and that I love. So this is such a treat. And we're just going to dive right in. Mm-hmm. If people have not heard of you for some reason, you have developed one of the, I guess, most successful, I don't even like using that word, but most prominent, kind of loudest voices in the content creation, social media world in Portland food and now wine. Mm-hmm. And I think of you as a really formative person as social media has grown to more importance, especially when it plays a role in food. And I think you do it in a really responsible, thoughtful, intentional way. So much so that, you've been featured in Eater and Portland Monthly. You're very involved in the community of food and wine. You're friends with chefs and winemakers, which I think says a lot about the way you approach things. And you're really involved in social justice as well and making that a part of your platform. So I want to get to all of these things. Oh, and you also had a really incredible, still have, supper club called Tikim with two other fabulous Filipino women that we'll get to as well. But thank you for being here.
Oh my gosh, it's a pleasure.
And we love to dive in by breaking the ice with a glass of wine. Could you tell us about what you brought and why it's special for you?
Well, since it's morning, I know people probably don't know it's morning, but it's morning. We're having white wine for breakfast. But Kelsey asked me to bring a bottle of significance to me. And when my husband and I got married in February 2022, it was still the pandemic, like not spending too much time really traveling or anything. But we went to Berlin and Paris for our honeymoon. And when we were leaving Berlin, I last minute was like, I need to bring home some wine. And so without any thought, I saw this bottle. It was a Riesling, and it's the only bottle of wine I brought from Berlin. So I wanted to share it.
And you brought it here?
Of course.
I was like, I'm going to bring the Coravan. So we poured it from the Coravan so that you can actually go enjoy this bottle with your husband, because I don't think Chad would be very happy with me.
He's fine. He was like, that's a great idea, babe. So yeah.
I kind of love that. I mean, I actually don't know I'm not familiar with this producer, but it's a Rheingau 2018 dry Riesling. And I love everything about that. So we try it and see what we think. Have you smelled it or tried it yet?
I have. I haven't tried it. I just smelled it. Yeah. I mean,
you've officially become a wine nerd when you like Riesling.
Oh my God, I love Riesling. Actually, it's so funny that you say that.
Oh, that's amazing.
Oh my God, yummy. I could drink that whole
perfect
bottle.
Breakfast wine.
Yeah, I could drink that whole bottle.
Wish I didn't have to work after this.
Lemon, yum. It's so funny that you say that, because one of the moments for me that I was like, oh shit, I might have made it. Am I allowed to curse?
Yes, I think so. I think Kelly Fox was dropping F-bombs, so yeah, go for it.
Sorry.
Thanks, Kelly.
Kind of the moment where I, thought, oh my gosh, like people actually take what I have to say seriously about wine. Like I have arrived. I was actually tasting with Drew Voigt, Harper Voigt, right? Like prolific winemaker. Yeah. And we were just talking wine, my tasting with him and Jess West. went much longer than we had anticipated. And we're just like talking. And then I was like an hour late to my next tasting. I was like, I really have to go. And I was like, but I do need some wine. And I got a bottle of his Blanc de Blanc. I got some approachment wine from Jess. And he was like, well, since you're a wine nerd. And I was like, I'm sorry, what? Did you just call me a what? And he was like, I have a special bottle for you. And he gave me a bottle of Riesling that he made. And he was like, you're going to love this. And I know you're going to love this. And I was like, oh my God.
You're like, I've arrived.
Wow.
It's the wine people's favorite grape. It's like Riesling and Chenin Blanc. Did you go to the Riesling party that they did at Hi-Fi
I wish I did. I wasn't here.
It was so funny because it was literally like a Riesling party that this group from New York came and put on. And there was like a hip hop artist and DJs and all Riesling. And we all got such bad heartburn because it just has so much acidity.
Acid. Yes.
And like 3 hours in, we went to the dive bar next door and I paid a bartender $20 for like a quarter full bottle of Tums and brought it back to the party.
I think bars should start
And it was like
carrying
I
Tums.
had hard drugs. People were like, I heard you have Tums. Like, can I get some of that? And I think if you're going to be a bougie wine bar, you should have Tums.
Yes, I think that should just be a thing that like, people get like instead of after dinner mints, you get a Tum. I feel like that we're at that age. But it is fascinating that you call it a winemaker's grape because Chenin Blanc has a special place in my heart because that's my first white wine that I liked because of this woman. When I thought I wasn't a white wine liker. And I also learned from you that Gamay is a winemaker's grape.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, and I remember this might be a good segue into, because I want to hear, I'm going to tell us a little bit about your background and the food, the love of food and what you grew up with that eventually brought you to wine. But I went over to dinner at your house and you were serving a really amazing Filipino chicken dish. I don't, what dish was it?
It's called adobo. And it's like every Filipino has an adobo. It's like it's kind of like our national dish, many national dishes, but adobo, everybody has a recipe of their own, as simple as it is. But I'm from Manila. So Manila is like the big city. That's the New York City. So, the adobo I know is like very simplistic. It's just black pepper, vinegar, and soy sauce, and garlic, and bay leaves for aromatics. And then you just braise the chicken in it.
It was delicious. And I remember Googling it before going. So I was like, I want to bring a wine that'll pair. And with like the spice and the richness of the chicken, I always love Chenin with chicken. And so I was like, I hope this works. And then I remember you saying like, oh, I don't drink white wine. And I was like, oh, bummer. But I was like, it's really good together.
Yes. You were it was great because you literally walked in. You were like, I brought wine to pair. It's a white wine, but I also brought a bag of red. If you hate it, I'm never going to force it.
Comfortable, you know? Well, so I would love to hear about, and just give us the broad strokes, but like, what role did food play in your upbringing? And was wine ever a part of that?
So I'm going to start by answering the latter question first. No, wine was not part of it. Filipinos aren't like historically wine drinking people.
Well, wine grapes don't grow there.
Well, yeah, wine grapes don't grow there. It isn't necessarily part of the food waste. There's old wine, like old rice wine. Like rice wine is a thing. It's more spirits too, were rums. And then if, you're bougie like my parents, it was cognac, But wine really was reserved for communion.
Yeah.
So, the majority of Filipinos in the Philippines are Catholic. And so we only really associate wine like, communion or, Western countries. So wine was not part of my upbringing at all. Food, although, I think to answer that, not in the traditional sense of like the American sense of like, oh, we have these heirloom family recipes. My family didn't cook. My mom had never seen a stove until we immigrated to the Philippines.
To the U.S.?
Sorry.
Yeah.
To the U.S. And, she pretty much just had to figure out her way around the kitchen. So from like a cooking perspective, no. But Filipinos, as a people, really see food as a love language. The typical third place for Filipinos can be like city centers, the mall, outside, and there's always food involved. You don't go to a party in the Philippines and there's no food involved. You don't go to karaoke and just get beers. There's always food. We have like pulutan culture, which is like, you're just eating appetizers. But that is how I know how to give and receive affection. So I would say that it's just part of my DNA.
And at what point did you decide, well, I guess this is kind of getting into like, how did you build this platform that you have? But was that ever on your radar? Like, did you ever think, oh, food is going to be a part of my life in more than just the way it's part of everyone's life, like social settings and giving in, showing love? Did you ever think, oh, it's going to be a job, or it's going to be?
Absolutely not.
No.
No, 0% thought that. I mean, I've always known it's something that I love. I love to host. I've always been the person that every friend in every chapter of my life would ask for references. Where do I go? Like, oh my God, what's a good place to eat here when I go to this city? Even when I was broke, people were like, where do I go in San Francisco? I'm like, oh man, I can tell you places up to $30, but, just knowing that I've always been that friend that, shows affection with food. I knew it would always be part of my life, but not from this level. This came on accident. I stumbled upon becoming a creator on accident.
Could you tell that story?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So the pandemic, that changed all of our lives, all of our trajectories in a way. My now husband and I closed on a house in Montevilla, which is east of Mount Tabor, in Portland, since it's a more blue collar, neighborhood, a bit more diverse than other neighborhoods, a lot of immigrant families. So we closed on a house there, and downtown Montevilla is kind of a very hyper local strip. A well-celebrated, well-loved restaurant, Country Cat, was on that strip, but that was what it was, best known. It was
before Lazy Susan.
Before Lazy Susan. Mm-hmm. But when we closed on the house was when Lazy Susan was slated to open, because we closed on the house in February 2020. We moved in right at the end of February 2020. Oh. I went for a work trip, came back, and then the world shut down. And knowing that there were these openings happening in downtown Montevilla coming soon, I was terrified for these businesses to just fail to launch, A, and B, other businesses that I love so much, all of these great mom and pop restaurants, cafes, locally owned food carts, that, people were worried whether or not they would have a job, period, right? Pay their house, period. Get their rent paid, period. But I wanted our beloved places, which I feel is the beating heart of Portland, which is our food, to just not survive an unprecedented time. So I just thought, hey, I started this Instagram like just a few months ago that I was going to share recipes and talk about places that I go, and trips, all that. And it wasn't really in the ambition of becoming an influencer. I honestly had major imposter syndrome with that. I was like, there's no way people are going to care about what I have to say. Like, I'm not aesthetic, like all of these things. So it's like, I'm just going to start this Instagram and talk about where to get takeout, talk about what's open, because I would Google it and Google was not reliable.
Yeah.
It would literally say closed and it's open. It would say open and it would be like, only for takeout or only limited hours. There was no resource at that time that was reliable to know where to support and where to go. So I kind of took it upon myself to do that, to help, because publications, food journalism just stopped.
Yeah.
So, my now husband and I we sat down and mindfully looked at our budget, knowing that full well we might not have a job tomorrow. But what we have right now, what can we allocate more from other funds to intentionally support small businesses? And then I would just use that for content. And it's still that model today.
Have you always been someone that cares that much about the community around you, whether in Portland or elsewhere? Because I think a lot of people looked around during the pandemic and said, oh, small businesses are struggling. I would love to help. But not a lot of people made the decision you did to consciously use your voice, be consistent about it, follow through with that. Have you been involved in, I don't know what you call it, community action or, just that, played that role of leadership in community before this?
I would say not intentionally, I guess. I think that, living in a city like Portland, Oregon, being, a Southeast Asian, a brown Asian, tattooed, I think just existing here is a rebellion, right? I knew that moving here that, generally I'd look around and there would be nobody that looks like me. I, have felt like the token Asian girl in a group. So I never really like looked at small business, like becoming a small business advocate until I really like found this as a gap. Part of it is because part of the appeal of me moving to Portland was because of the spirit of small business here in general. Like knowing that, every restaurant, doesn't matter what price point, I'd get the bang for my buck here. I really saw pride in what people made and offered here when I was thinking about moving here. So I've always known it was part of the values of Portland. And so obviously likes, and that drew me to here. But I would say that I wasn't as vocal about my support of small businesses until the pandemic, because it was really it wasn't just something that we took for granted. It was something that we could lose.
Well, and something you said about what are people going to care about what I have to say, especially I'm not aesthetic. I think influencer is almost a problematic word because it covers too much right now. If you think about what it means, someone who has influence. Okay, well, maybe in the past that was someone who was writing for a print outlet. Then maybe it was someone on radio. Then maybe it was someone on TV. And those are just a medium with which to have influence. And within that world, you could be making people laugh. You could be selling a beauty product. You could be reviewing a restaurant. And now, the fact is, print publication has moved to, or print media has moved to social media, and print advertising has moved to social advertising. And it almost follows that, print food criticism has moved to social food criticism. And I'm sure I'm going to piss a lot of people off by saying this, but it doesn't matter if you have the New York Times behind your name as the food critic or the wine critic, if no one's reading it. The fact is, people are living on social media. And that almost is a double-edged sword, because anyone, you don't have to get hired by the New York Times to give your thoughts on food and wine. And so for better or for worse, there's a lot of people out there giving their opinions. And I think the viewer feels confused in a lot of ways of are they selling me something? Are they giving me their honest opinions? And when you find someone who you can trust, who you look at their posts and you're they're not trying to wow me with pretty editing or cute clothes or a bunch of selfies, it makes you trust them more. Do you feel like that's part of the reason why people have responded to your platform so much?
I mean, that's a fascinating way to look at it. I guess still to this day, I don't know. Fundamentally, why I make my content the way I make it is because I feel a great responsibility to those who make the things I talk about. So that is just a personal preference. I honestly don't do that for anybody but my own preference, as one of those, the old saying of do unto others as you want done for you. I think that for me to want to talk about something, I have to love it. I have to admire it. And so there's always a person behind it, and behind that person is a story. I have 3 seconds to catch an attention of a viewer. If I put my focus on catching that viewer's attention, I would lose sight of the content of what I'm trying to say, the meat of it. And so maybe that's why people trust me. I don't have the most followers here in Portland as a viewer. I don't have super crazy viral things. But to me, there's the people. What's nice about how the shift of media has become since pretty much the coming up of Twitter, of Instagram, of TikTok. Oh my God, TikTok's a beast. I think that it's really allowed the consumer to adapt with our amount of choice, for better or worse, of modern day. It definitely feels like it's on the consumer more so than those who are advertising to really choose their own journey. Yes, you will get fed certain things because of the algorithm, but nobody has hacked the algorithm. So in a way, it democratizes, advertising, but I don't do this for advertising. Yes, it helps a little bit to get the word out there. I have had business owners literally tell me, holy crap, Nori, that video that went viral for some reason gave us 20% more than our best day on a Wednesday. like things like that. That I'm like, okay, this is why I do what I do. Like, this is why I do this. But it's ultimately up to the consumer. I think there are consumers out there who want to be sold to. There are consumers out there that want somebody to tell them, influencers to tell them, this is what's cool, this is what's good, this is what's Instagrammable. And whoever is looking for something and seeking something out will find you. Yeah. So for me, I'm going to make content that is genuine to me and I feel respects whatever topic I'm talking about. And then the consumers or the people which that resonate will find me.
Yeah.
I just kind of trust the process.
Well, that's one thing I love about what you put out there is you're always so genuinely excited about it, whether that's a restaurant or a dish or now wine. Like I have vicariously enjoyed, sometimes it's easy to feel jaded probably in any industry you're in, and wine just happens to be mine. And I'm like, I've tried all the wine and what am I excited about now? Or people are saying the same things. And I've really loved like watching you fall in love with wine, as cliche as that sounds. Yeah. And I love watching you like discover your new favorite wine or your new favorite producer. And how has like when the food platform took off, was wine kind of on your radar in a meaningful way, or did you ever think this would expand into wine, or what kind of hooked you about wine and pulled you that direction?
Yeah, I guess I'm just an ongoing book of stumbling upon things. So, I mean, I've always, ever since I, developed a taste for alcohol, I've always like appreciated wine. I, was the early 20s girl in Trader Joe's with a basket full of wine. I evolved from $2 Chuck pretty quickly, getting a Chianti or whatever else that's available that, caught my eye. But I definitely, used to shop for the bottle. Making the label is so cute. I got to get that. And I kind of just found what I liked from there. I mean, that's why I had such strong opinions when you met me. Then I'm like, I hate white, right? But I mean, that's obviously shifted. I think just in my deep exploration of food and intentional exploration of food, I really started to see wine as the same thing as food. I mean, I didn't see a line between either. I saw it as part of the experience. Definitely since before I started doing this deep dive into wine, specifically the Willamette Valley, I recognize that it's an agricultural product. It is of the earth. There's really minimal intervention. A winemaker really can't do too much to it other than let it do what it does.
Good winemaker.
Good winemaker, yes. But still, even the big brands that put something on the shelf packed with additives, all of that, there's still very little that's done to that wine in comparison to other things we consume, right? It's not super processed. Yeah. But, I started to recognize that and, I'd go eat somewhere and get the wine pairing. But then the catalyst to me deep diving into wine was when I started to make a personal connection with it. Yeah. So instead of it being this product that I knew I enjoyed, it kind of like, I have the extra fun, so I'll go for the wine pairing. I found a personal connection to it when actually I took on a paid partnership with Visit McMinnville. They had stumbled upon my content, specifically Lee McCollins, stumbled upon my content, and they had reached out to me and said, hey, it's we're in the middle of the pandemic. It was 2022, November 2022. They had said, actually, was it 2022? Yeah, it was 2022. And they mentioned, hey, it's rainy, it's gray in Oregon. We'd love to see if we can get you out here to just create a video of maybe just your lens, right, of what McMinnville has to offer. And so I'm like, oh man, I've never actually explored wine country. I'm like, is this going to be for me? I was definitely heavily into food at this time. I've always seen, quote, wine country as a place for, affluent white women, right? Bachelorette parties, that type of thing that I was like, oh man.
Or like dudes in suits.
Suits, like making a deal, buying that, $1,000 bottle of wine, trying to impress people. Like that's my idea of what wine country was, because living in Reno, Nevada, when we immigrated to the States, that was the closest wine country, right? It's just a few hours drive from Reno, Nevada is Napa and Sonoma. So to me, I'm like, oh man, that's not my vibe. That's not my world. But sure, I'll go to wine country and talk about what's out here. I was immediately met with the warmest people that I've ever encountered. It was not I didn't walk into a place with, I mean, granted, I was coming as an influencer, right? So people are a little bit more prepared when you're coming, when you've been announced that you're coming. But still, there was no stuffiness, fluffiness to it. The first tasting I had in the McMinnville area was, it was the Health Valley Vineyards or something like that.
The one that has the tasting room on 3rd Street?
No, it was out past that farm.
Or probably Yamhill, yeah.
Yeah. But like, you know, the person pouring my wine could have been my auntie, right? Like she's so warm and welcoming. You know, it was raining, so she let me sit in the little cellar area with the dogs, you know, instead of having us outside. And then I left just thinking, oh my God, there are so many people here that I just want to know why they're here. And, you know, this is a completely different world than what I thought wine could be. And then I just started coming back. And then when I lost my job in 2023, I worked for Zoom. I lost my job. I was part of a huge layoff. I spent 8 months, searching for my next thing. You know, my husband was like, don't just take a job for the sake of taking a job like that. You're going to be miserable if you do that. So bless him for doing that. But it also allowed me the ability to really deep dive into the Willamette Valley. And people thought I moved.
Every time I saw you, you were out there, I was like, she's out there more than the winemakers that I know.
It was
she's covering some ground.
Yes, it was boot camp. And so I think that was in part a lot of why I just fully dove right in.
And how did you navigate that? Was it you would meet with someone and they'd be like, you should go see this person? Or did you find it great where you're like, oh, I didn't know I loved Gamay. Like, who else makes Gamay? Like, was it a mixture of research and word of mouth and recommendations?
It's all people.
Yeah.
So, you know, the restaurant that I chose to go when I contracted with Visit McMinnville just said, okay, I know this is out of budget. I will pay for it out of pocket. We went to Opta. I mean, I know, rest in peace. Literally, it's like, it was a life-changing experience when I went. It really turned on its head what I could expect out of Oregon. Yeah. But their beverage director, still the beverage director for Tributary Hotel Ron Acierto, is also Filipino. So Ron sort of became like my big brother, godfather of wine. In the middle of the pandemic, actually, just kind of like out of nowhere, he found me on Instagram. And actually, this was before I went to Opta. He found me on Instagram and was like, hey, I just want to chat with you. Like, you're doing some really cool things around Filipino culture. And he just sends me his phone number. I was like, who is this Ron guy? Okay.
And we should say, in the most non-creepy way.
No,
Ron doesn't have a creepy bone in his bone.
No, and Ron is also a queer man.
Yes.
You know, so not only is he a Filipino and queer man in wine, like, you know, that he just is such a presence. Yeah. But, you know, he was like, here's my phone number, let's chat. And I was like, okay. And I was like, I just called him. We talked for like almost 2 hours.
Wow.
We were just talking about we were just getting to know each other. And then he also just, one of the nuggets that he shared with me is, he's like, you know who Cesar Chavez is, right? I'm like, yeah, of course. We have Cesar Chavez. Everywhere you go, there's Cesar Chavez Street. And he was like, yeah, well, you know how he was sort of like the face of the labor movement in, you know, like the wine country, all this. And I was like, yeah. He was like, well, you know, he wouldn't have done any of that without Lariat Leong. And I was like, who's Lariat Leong? Lariat Leong is a Filipino man who was one of the reasons why Cesar Chavez galvanized like a group of people.
What?
Yeah, nobody hears about Lariat Leong. There's a book about it. You should read it. And so to me, I'm like, wow, the spirit of Filipinos. Like, wow. You know, I think that people don't recognize, like, we are sort of in the diaspora. I'm not, you know, like the diaspora of Filipinos. One of our biggest exports are people. Mm. We are everywhere in the globe, generally in positions of hospitality or nursing. You know, like serving people in a way or another.
Caring for people.
Yes. But to a point where so much of the work the Filipinos do are invisible. And so that's right there an example of that, right? Like nobody hears about Larry Leong, but he was right there, right next to Cesar Chavez, really helping galvanize the movement towards, just fair ways for vineyard workers.
Yeah.
So, just little things like that these stories are what made me kind of search for more. The wine was the bonus. The wine's always the bonus. I always feel like I find another story because somebody says, oh my gosh, have you checked out this place? You like this wine? Have you had... The thing I found about Willamette Valley is it's more community than it is truly competition.
100%.
Nobody's competing. People are just like, oh, my stuff, no, that guy down there, 2 doors down is way better. I'm like, okay.
And what you said about like Napa and Sonoma versus Portland, and I think things are changing a little bit in Sonoma, but when I was a buyer in California, that was always my experience, spending time in Napa, Sonoma, even Santa Barbara. It wasn't that there was hostility, but there wasn't community. It was like everyone is their own island. You didn't get this sense of like everyone's buddies. They're all like, oh, we're doing this project or we're swapping whatever it is. And we did a dinner. Oh, you were at the dinner with Clemence Lalarge from Champagne Lalarge Peugeot. And she was telling me that in Champagne, there's like, it feels like outright hostility in a lot of ways, like very competitive. Neighbors don't speak to each other. And she said Sonoma has felt like a breath of fresh air for her. And, I grew up in the Willamette Valley, but never thought of it as wine country at the time. But, we knew all our neighbors, everyone was friends. Yeah. And it's the same thing now. Everyone helps each other. Everyone, you go to one winery and there's always someone else stopping by to like bring back something that they borrowed. And you end up talking to them and then someone has a bottle of wine that's like, oh, I just cracked this open. You want to try it? And like some of my favorite memories from the Valley have just been these impromptu get-togethers, in places like Hi-Fi, or I think McMinnville has become kind of this hub for community. Because that's the best part is like you run into everyone and it's a party.
I love that you mentioned that because you asked the question, was it this, oh, I love this grape, I'm going to hunt this grape. No, it's not that deep. It literally was, whether it was, somebody I met or a publicist being like, hey, you need to go check this place out. I saw you like that. You should go here. Like word of mouth, that type of word of mouth, but also literally being in the tasting room and then like 2 other winemakers walk in. And they, like you said, like, oh, yeah, I borrowed this thing. And just the other day I met Michael Mega of Nisa. And then like we're sitting there and then Andrew from Radiant just like walks up just because he had the free day and wanted to go say hi. And then I got to talk to pretty much like the godfather of sparkling wine in the Willamette Valley. It's just those things that it's like, wow, this really is a community of people, of humans.
Do you feel like you kind of answered this a little bit, but when it comes to food and wine, whether it's a winery or a dish, like is your entry point always the connection with the human behind the wine or the food? Or like when you're trying a new wine or trying a new restaurant, like at what point do you even think of the product independent from the person? Or like, can you support one and not the other? Like if you love a dish, but then you meet the chef and they're a jerk, or same with wine, does that affect like, will you, and I know you don't call yourself a reviewer, but will you still promote that item?
That absolutely affects it. So this is where my bias comes in, right? It doesn't matter if I absolutely adore you. It does not matter if your product is not something I wholeheartedly love. I don't find it fair to tell other people's about it unless it was
both
one of those
ways,
things.
you mean?
Yeah, unless it was one of those things where it was like, for example, this is going to make a lot of people like, oh my God, Nora, you can't make that broad stroke. And I know this is still a mission of yours. I don't like Syrah.
My wine director doesn't like Syrah, and I have an ongoing argument with him about it.
Yes.
I think it's a cilantro enzyme,
It's just it is because I also taste soap with cilantro. But for example, like I can understand though that when a place is creating this fantastic Syrah, it's not my fault I don't like Syrah. It's nobody's fault that that I don't like Syrah. If it's a place and I've met the winemakers, I know objectively that this is a solid wine, I just don't like it, sure, I'll talk about it. It's the same thing with food. There's a little bit of there's still kind of an objectivity to it that it's like, it can't just always be about me. But when it is one of those like, oh my God, like that person just is horrible. Like the work, like for example, they have a terrible reputation. It's, whatever. And I might hesitate. I would hesitate, absolutely. And I think that's just because I'm still a person, and I still have my own principles and my own values. But I'm also a person that loves delicious things. So if it's something where, a person might kind of be a jerk, like they're not super nice, like whatever, or warm, everybody has their reasons of why they're the way they are. Not everybody needs to be everybody's cup of tea. But their product and their vision is so great, and it should be talked about. As long as they didn't harm anybody.
As long as they're not sexually harassing. There's a big range.
It's a huge range. This is the human component of it. When you're working with a story to distill about humans, we are imperfect beings, right? And so it's just one of those things where I have to make that decision. And the beauty about me not relying on being content creator as my job, I don't have to do anything I don't want to do.
Yeah.
I am not beholden to anybody saying, hey, this is going to catch that brand's eye. I don't care if it doesn't, you know what I mean? And so, I will stand back and be like, okay, well, are they just kind of a jerk because they kind of have an ego? Whatever. Who cares, right? So,
I think that's really beautiful. And I want people to hear that you are not, this isn't your lifeblood. Like you have a day job, basically, And I have found that in my own life with acting and with creative pursuits. Like when I leaned on that as my rent money, it suddenly became a whole lot less fun and less creative and less free thinking, because I was fear-based, and I felt like, oh, if I don't take this thing, even if I don't feel great about it, then I won't survive. And when you can separate that from I'm fine, I can do this if I want or not, I think that makes a huge difference. And again, makes the viewer, consumer trust your voice a whole lot more.
I mean, I hope so. I think that there is still a huge, just assumption that this is what I do, period, right? And I get that. I think that's where a lot of people place that distrust with influencers. They're like, well, you're just getting paid. You got that for free. Of course. No, you can look at my credit card statements.
I've been out with her. She pays.
Yeah. But, it's, I think one of the things that we just have to remember is that when we're in a position of a scarcity mindset, we're not doing our best work. But we also have to remember, and this is something I love about women, right? We are so multifaceted, so multi-layered. I'm not saying men aren't, right? But have you ever seen a woman multitask? It is a thing of art, right? We are such complex beings that, I think that I encourage people to see my content, hear my stories, hear other people's stories as I'm not just an influencer, right? I am also a dog mom. I am also a wife, a friend, a sister. There are so many things about me that inform my view on things. And this is just a glimpse of it. It's the same thing with wine, food, any form of art. I see wine and food as art. Yeah. There is so much to consume other than how it tastes and how it makes you feel. It's what we take away from it. But there's just so many things based on what your life experience is that will inform your relationship with something. And I think my ultimate goal with everything I do is I want people to form an emotional relationship to things, not the way I do. I want them to form their own.
It's been fascinating having these conversations, because everybody I've had on here, maybe I didn't know, I knew them as a winemaker or a wine writer. And almost everyone has some kind of creative side, whether that's art or music or dance or opera. And when I first officially became a sommelier, I remember thinking, oh, I can't tell people that I'm also an actor because they won't take me seriously. And I want them to think that I am so professional and so focused on wine. And it was like so sad, like trying to hide this whole part of myself. And I finally had a coach or a therapist or something reframe it for me years later. Like, don't you think that as like a woman who runs a business, by admitting the things that you're passionate about, don't you think that might empower not only your team, but like anyone else you come in contact with, that like you can be multi-passionate and multi-dimensional. And as humans, we're not meant to be one thing.
No. It's one of my favorite things about you. I mean, anybody who has seen us together, I'm usually like, she's a sommelier, a business owner, and an actress. And people are like, okay, are you her publicist? I'm like, no, I just really like her.
I appreciate it. Social justice, whether or not you like put this, sometimes that feels heavy as like, I'm on a mission, but I really think you weave in social consciousness and the people you represent and give voice to, women, BIPOC folks, LGBTQ community. Was that always part of the idea from day one, or did what happened during the pandemic and Black Lives Matter, did that kind of inform the way you started this platform?
It's part of my identity. Yeah. It's just part of my identity. I am Filipino, born and raised. We are a peoples who have since the beginning of time been colonized over and over and over again. So I come from a family of activists. My mom was an activist. My oldest sister, my goodness, in her college years, I come from a family of activists and punks. I grew up listening to punk rock because of my oldest siblings. Growing up in Reno, Nevada, my formative years, I was into hardcore punk. And that is when I learned that music is politics. Art and politics are the same things. Food is political. We cannot escape that this is just how it is in modern world. Things have a deeper connection than really we see from the surface. So it's so part of my identity. I don't know how to not be like this. And so because of that, to be authentic to my own voice, I don't hide it. So I think it's just really, if anything, the coming of Nom Nom Nori is to what it is today, and the pandemic being the reason. It's all connected again, right? This was a pressure cooker of a few years.
It was.
It really just we were in isolation. Everything was that much more deeply perceived. Obviously there was the social unrest, but none of these things were new, right? And I think what happened during this time, the amalgamation of all of these parts, I think it just made it so it kind of like took a microphone to something of my voice that people recognized. I think it's more so like people noticed I'm like this more than me turning into this.
Well, I wondered if this sense of social inequality was something that you noticed when you moved to the U.S. and saw the racial disparity, or were you even aware of that in the Philippines? Because I know there's quite a big economic disparity there as well.
Absolutely. In the Philippines, not so much. I am lucky. I'm lucky that I was born into the family I was born into.
And you left pretty young-ish, right?
Quite young. Yeah. My formative years were spent between both places. But just knowing that my family, we were absolutely the haves. But from the beginning, though, my mom, both my parents are dead. But my memories of my mother, the most vivid memories of my mother are of her generosity. And because of her generosity, I was very aware of those who did not have.
Like to others or to your family?
Others, yeah. To others. It could be somebody walking down the street needs something. Some of my most vivid memories of my mom, for example, are at this nice grocery store, like our version of Erewhon, in Manila. I'm just a kid, but there was this ruckus happening just like 3 cash wraps down or something like that. And there was this man, and he just looked so sad. And there were these security guards with him, and he was crying. And he was checking out and he just like checked out for like a couple things, but he had many things in his pockets. And it was just food. It was just all food. Like it was like, he wasn't stealing cigarettes. He wasn't, you know what I mean? It was all just food. And my mom, like just without even thinking about it, goes over there and I could see them and I'm witnessing this. And she said, "What's the problem here?" And they were like, "Ma'am, you know, just don't worry about it, ma'am, like whatever." And she's like, "No, really, what happened here?" And, you know, she knows everybody at this grocery store and they tell her, and she was just like, you're not going to penalize a man for needing to feed his family. Mm-hmm. And so she was like, "Let him go. I'm going to pay for his things." And then also hands him like a stack of cash. Just without even thinking about it. She didn't make a big fuss about it. She wanted the man to have dignity. Didn't make a whole fuss about it, just did all of that. And then, you know, told the security guards, "Leave him alone. It's covered." And then just goes back and pays for our things. And then we just go. So things like that. Another memory of my mother, you know, my parents owned a transportation company. She was visiting one of our yards where, you know, the buses are getting repaired. And we get out. And one thing that happens in the Philippines, if like you go to like more rural, more impoverished regions, people will come to you, because that's another thing. It's like, you know, the Philippine culture is all about help, you know, like helping one another. And so, you know, they'll ask like, "Hey, do you have anything, whatever?" But people knew my mom in that community. They all came, and there was this woman. She had a baby. She had a kid holding on to her. And I'm a kid. And at first I'm like, "I want to play with kids. Can I just go play with them, please?" But I'm just sitting there, you know, watching what's happening. And she kind of just like, you know, came up to my mom. She was like, "Ma'am, I don't want anything. I just want to tell you, you look like a movie star." And my mom's like, "Okay, thank you." You know, my mom's wearing designer, everything. And then she was like, "It's your shoes. I've never seen anything so beautiful." And my mom's like, "Oh, thank you." And she looks down and the woman's wearing just flip-flops, right? And my mom looks down at her feet and says, "What size are your feet?" And the woman was like, like size 6 or whatever her size was. And I was like, "Oh, great, perfect." She was like, "We were the same size. These hurt my feet." We were sitting in a car. Her feet are not hurting. Yeah. Woman lived and died in heels. Yeah. And she was like, "Oh, these hurt my feet so much. I have a long day. Can I trade you shoes? You're going to do me a favor if you trade me shoes." And then she's like, "Ma'am, there's no way. I'll just give these to you." She's taking them off. She's like, No, really, take these off my hands. We don't have any room in the car. And then, you know, kind of just like fibbed and said, "You're doing me a favor."
But didn't make her feel.
Yeah, you're doing me a favor, right? And then she handed her shoes over to the woman. And like she just did. I've seen her do that with shoes. I had seen her do that with jewelry. Like she is really was the living embodiment of she would give the shirt off of her back to help another person.
Well, you're clearly carrying her spirit forward.
Not in that way.
No,
I am
seriously.
not giving anyone my shoes.
I love hearing those stories because I see that so vividly in, you know, obviously in a different way, but like in the message that you project out, it's always positive and encouraging and loving and supportive. Mm-hmm. And social media can be a really toxic place, you know, in a lot of ways. And I think your message is a breath of fresh air.
Life is too short. Honestly, like why are we on the internet to bait anger? Yeah. You know?
How do you stay not only sane but like grounded in that message of love and giving when, for me, it's so easy for me to get sucked into like the need for the like or the engagement or, that take it personally. Like if people don't like a piece of content that I take it like I'm a failure, I'm unlovable. Mm-hmm. How do you separate those two?
I don't, I'm human. You know, there are times where I'm going through and I'm like, why? Like, why is this not I put so much work into this and love into this. But then I always just have to remind myself, like, who are you doing this for? You know, I think that one of the things that I always try to tell people as, any form of advice that I can give them is really align on your values. really understand what's important to you. And then just kind of use that as like the, this does not serve me, right? It does not serve me if I see, 1,000 likes or 50.
Yeah.
It honestly, it doesn't serve me more or less anyway. I got my message out. This is what I wanted to say. And if it's something specific to a specific maker or a chef and they liked it, that's really it. That's all I need. One of the biggest sources of dopamine for me isn't necessarily the likes and the views. It's the message from the winemaker or, the person, the tasting room manager that was working with me that would say, Nori, like, I love this. One of my wine content actually does not perform as well as my food content. Oh yeah. I think that's just because
wine is tough. You don't have the visual aspect.
You can only do so much with wine. There isn't going to be like a cheese pull. You know what I mean? Like there's no wine pull.
Oh, I know.
So there isn't like that visual, like you said, like that visual, like you see so many bottle shots, right? You can only see so many bottles. But one of the things like recently, Kate from Antica Terra, I went to Antica Terra and I wanted to tell everybody about Antica Terra. It's like not one of my best performing videos, but I had so much I wanted to say and I captured it. I think I captured their vibe. And the first thing she said, she was like, you captured that so well, what we're trying to do so well. And when somebody says that to me, you've captured what we're trying to do so well, I'm like, bing,
yes.
This is why I do it.
Yeah. So. Where do you see this all going? Like, and maybe it's the larger question of like, where do you see food and wine, journalism and media heading? Because I feel like social media is really enmeshing the two of them in a lot of ways. And where do you see your role in that? I
mean, it's tough, right? Studies are showing that young people are not drinking as much as we did. And
give them time.
I know. And even we didn't drink as much as older generations. But what we're seeing is just a change in how we're consuming, right? I think overall, across the board, this is from any industry, people are wary to spend money, period. It doesn't matter what industry it is. It isn't just food and wine. It's construction, it's tech, it's all of it. If you look at the grand scheme of things, everybody's a little bit worried right now. But this is cyclical in human nature, right? We all go through these times of war, of whatever else going on in the world.
Proverbial winter. Yeah.
Winter. We're going through a little winter phase. I think that it will evolve. I think that people are becoming, and this is again broad strokes. I like making generalizations, but I think that people are getting more and more interested in being intentional in how they consume, because for so long we were full speed ahead in convenience. But I think what I'm observing is, well, yes, like I'm an example of this. Well, yes, I'm not drinking wine every day. I'm not eating out. I eat out more than other people do. But when I do, it's definitely, the wine costs a little bit more, right? It isn't, the $10 bottle that I'm buying every other day, right? It is now the $50 to $100 bottle that, when I meet it, I hold it dear and I buy it and I store it for a special occasion. There's just more intentionality to how I spend my money. And I think people are doing that too, even with shopping. We're not all going to fast fashion anymore. Now we're more seeking those heirloom pieces. I think that that's just where that shift is happening. And I don't know, I can't answer the question of where do I see what I do going, because I mean, I think at this point it's quite limitless. I'm dreamscaping some things, and I think it's more long term. I think how I can answer that is my intention. I think ultimately my intention of why I do anything that I do is for my people. And what I mean by that, I mean women, specifically Black and brown women, specifically Filipinos. Mm-hmm. So, I want to be part of the harmony of voices that are demanding center stage of our culture. And that could mean anything, right? It would be really cool if I made wine cool in the Philippines. I mean, it's getting there. Their wine bars are opening.
In the Philippines.
In the Philippines. I think that would be cool. You know, I want to continue to unearth Filipinos doing cool shit. Like, you know, I think people don't know because it's not like, again, Filipinos, we're not always like, hey, I'm Filipino and I'm doing cool stuff. But like a prolific winemaker, Kate Payne Brown, she's a quarter Filipino. You would never guess.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I was texting with her yesterday about being on the show.
Yes, so she is a quarter Filipino, for example. Franz Fitzpatrick of Elevate, Tom Fitzpatrick's wife, he's the winemaker at El Oro. They have a project called Elevate.
Yeah.
She's half Filipino. Like things like that. And then Malia from Landmass, Filipino.
Yep, I knew that.
Right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, Ron. Ron is clearly Filipino, right? And it's just, there are so many Filipinos doing cool stuff, not just in food, but also in wine, that I'm like, we need to be louder about this and make it that this is a space for us also. And we can pave our own way also. And we should be proud that this is where we came. We came from a place that, you know, it's one of those things. It's like if a French person started making wine, you're like, duh. You've had wine since you were like 5, you know? But, you know, if Filipinos interested in wine, it's actually quite special, and I think it should be encouraged.
Yeah.
Because why not us?
I love that. Well, I want to be conscious of your time and send you back home to your husband with this beautiful dessert Riesling. So thank you so much for coming on. We need to do a part 2 sometime soon, you know?
Season 2?
Yeah, season 2. I don't even know if we're doing seasons on this, but
hopefully.
Just lots of good conversations.
Yes.
Cheers. Thank you so much for being here. This was a delight.
She's so good. Opening up so beautiful.
I know, this is gorgeous. Until next time.